Hello everyone, this is Christine from Greenbook. Welcome and thank you for attending today's webinar brought to us by Morrow Matchbook. Today we have Todd Trouts with us and he's going to be talking about COVID-19 using System 1 to connect with consumers in a crisis. A couple quick housekeeping items. We are scheduled for 1 hour, so we won't keep you any longer than that. To submit a question, please look to the top right of your screen. There is a green text bubble icon. You click that to open the Ask a Question box, and you'll scroll down to the bottom where you'll type in and submit your question. Lastly, we are recording today, and we will send you a link to the recording by way of email in the next 2 to 3 business days. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Todd.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Christine. So today we're going to walk through 3 things. We're going to start off with understanding System 1 business decisions and some of the tools that we utilize to make those decisions. We're going to go through the opportunity and crisis of COVID-19 and how we can apply those System 1 tools within the current pandemic crisis. And then thirdly, we'll walk through why this matters. So first, a little bit about Morrow Matchbook. We focus on the intersection between behavior and emotion. And we follow the wealth of behavioral science work that we feel, behave, and then think. And we utilize these 3 lenses to close the gap between what consumers say and what they actually do. And by holistically understanding how consumers make decisions, we can better inform your research issues. We know that emotions are core to our System 1 response, and they make up a majority of our decision-making process. And we understand that System 1 decisions have the greatest impact on behavior. So we're going to start this next section looking at some System 1 business decisions, some case studies, as well as a few tools that we utilize to produce those case studies. The first tool we're going to walk through is IAT, or implicit association testing. IAT uses a timed choice-based exercise. We're asking consumers to engage in this timed behavioral sort, dragging stimuli into 2 choice boxes, trading off. And what we're capturing during that exercise is the conscious and subconscious mental processes that occur between the different time frames. There's 2 distinct paths for decision making, the implicit fast path and the explicit slow path. And what we're capturing in this time sort are those 2 paths. So in this case study, we're going to look at some implicit data for a business decision that was made by a large entertainment studio. So if we look at the chart on the left-hand side, without looking at the implicit response, we would looking at both the System 1 and System 2 responses together, or total, we would understand that the awesome movie had the greatest total interest, and the family movie had only 53%, or the least amount of interest. However, when we break the System 1 and System 2 responses apart, and we look at the implicit response, we find that the family movie actually had the highest total interest. And when we think about the entertainment industry, really the drivers in entertainment are emotional. And that's what we really want to understand in this case, is what were the movie titles that were being emotionally driven. What else was interesting about this case is that it reinforced a previous decision within the entertainment studio. And they had a gut feel to produce and already were working on the magical movie. And again, the implicit association test proved out that the magical movie was indeed the second most interesting movie title to follow up on. Next, we're going to talk about visual semiotics. We have a product that's called Brand Emotion. Brand Emotion is a product that uses visual semiotics to understand how people feel using images. Each respondent in a visual semiotics exercise creates a 10-image collage. They each get 200 images out of our normative library of 9,000 images. And with those 200 images, they'll go through and create a 10-image collage about how they feel about a brand or a piece of stimuli. So we can apply this strategically or tactically. Each respondent will then create another 10-image collage to describe the ideal. So what would the ideal emotional feelings be? And then using the brand image collages, we derive the brand's emotional signature. And these are the top emotions that the brand or the stimuli invokes. And then we also create an emotional segment map. And these segments allow us to understand and look at which segments or areas that the emotions are operating in. So looking at the image on the left-hand side, each image is coded with at least 10 emotional codes. And we deconstruct those images into 6 elements. This is a true System 1 passive collection of emotions, as the respondents are not associating emotions to the images, but we're deconstructing and capturing the emotions through the images themselves. So with that background, the next case study, and this is a tactical application using visual semiotics, we had a sleep aid client who had a product with a set of communications that was communicating that the sleep aid product would allow the consumer to fall asleep. And while consumers took that away, there really was the emotional component that they didn't really understand how they would feel the next day. Would they feel awakened or refreshed? So using visual semiotics, we were able to diagnose and understand that the feeling of being refreshed and awake was the key component in communicating to the client. So we made a purely visual change, no wording changes, and we were able to show with these visuals that emotion of feeling refreshed. And this visual change then led to a 20% increase in volume over the corresponding next 6 months. So understanding how consumers feel based upon the stimuli allowed us to make that change. Next, we're going to walk through the COVID data and the opportunity in this crisis using those 2 tools that we just walked through, both the brand emotion visual semiotics tool and the implicit association tool. We conducted a survey over a little over 1,200 US rep sample over the course of April 21st to the 24th. And we ran them through 2 brand emotion exercises as well as an implicit association exercise. We asked consumers to sort 30 industries into heroes or villains. So the stimuli would come up in the center of the screen, and they would drag and drop and sort those industries into those 2 areas. Were they a hero or were they a villain? And again, this is a timed drag and drop. And we asked them, how they felt these brands were communicating to them during this period of time. Did they feel that they were communicating as heroes or were they communicating as villains? We also ran them through the visual semiotics brand emotion exercise and asked them how brands were making them feel. So each respondent got a unique set of 200 images, which they would then scroll through and create a collage of 10 images based upon how they felt brands have been communicating to them. They then went through a second exercise with another unique set of 200 images and created a collage about how they felt brands were communicating to them and what the improved level of communication would be. So what would be the ideal communication? So what we got back is the emotional landscape is generally positive. Brands are currently communicating in the emotional segments that consumers would like to feel. So we show these segments in these 9 boxes. We have 9 different segments. Within each segment, there are 8 emotions. So we work with a set of 72 emotions, and those emotions are positive and negative and fit within each one of those segments. However, when we dig into the specific emotions that consumers are looking for, we can see that there is a disconnect between how brands are currently delivering and how the ideal delivery would look like. I'll explain a little bit about how we look at this emotional signature. The emotional signature is this pyramid that you're seeing at the bottom of the screen. The pyramid is set up so that the base emotion is at the bottom, and there is a building effect. The base emotion is the primary, the most important emotion, then the secondary emotion and tertiary emotion moving up the pyramid. So there's this building effect. The numbers in the center are index scores, how much they over-index compared to the normative set. And the order of the building shows the strength. So when we compare and contrast how brands are currently delivering and what the ideal looks like, that's the comparison set. So we're going to deep dive into this comparison. So currently, brands are communicating a sense of well-being and support, that base emotion, providing a sense of well-being, of contentedness, but also supportive and cooperative. On tertiary, we're looking at their communicating skills. When we think about skills, we're thinking about brands such as GE, Ford, Tesla, Zoom, tech companies, who then came in and this vacuum where not necessarily, the government was taking over, but brands came in and showed that they're skilled, that they're able to build and build things such as PPE, ventilators, controlling logistics. And then that also leads into the next emotion of controlling and taking charge, right? Brands during this pandemic came in and really showed an element of taking charge. And lastly, showing sympathy, that kind responsiveness and compassion. To the right of each one of those definitions are some example images that represent each one of those emotions. They're not necessarily images that respondents chose, but they're representative. They were part of the library and represent each one of those emotions. So when we look at the emotional signature, we want to look at starting at the base and then working our way up and thinking about not only that importance, but also all of them in context. So currently, brands are communicating that sense of well-being and support. However, what consumers are looking for, they're looking for brands to pivot and to deliver a sense of unity and energetic change. So the two emotions of controlling and skilled get replaced at quite a strong level with stimulating this feeling of change and energy, as well as unity and participation. And so we're looking for brands to change during this period of time and really deliver to us that sense of unity and energetic change. So can they pivot from what they're currently saying to deliver on these two additional emotions? In addition, they're looking for an increase in strength of the emotional delivery on the other elements within their communications. So an increase in that base emotion of contentedness, as well as an increase in being cooperative and an increase in being sympathetic. So who are our heroes? When we look at the implicit association data around with our 30 industries, our heroes help us get what we need. Things like grocery stores, food delivery services, online stores, healthcare, restaurants, streaming services, fast food. So during the quarantine, everything that we relied on and brands that we relied on, our heroes were those that got us what we needed during the time when we couldn't necessarily go out and get what we needed. And so communicating within that emotional construct, but also thinking about who those heroes are, they really were the brands that delivered what we couldn't get on our own. But who were some of those brands? So Amazon, Walmart, local grocers, and Netflix all surface as strong hero brands. And when we think of, well, who were the villains, again, looking at the implicit association data, our villains kept us restricted and stressed. Political organizations, cruise lines, the federal government, And financial services really cluster in here, as well as travel and travel services. So when we think about that a little bit, cruise lines were definitely, the epitome of quarantine and isolation. There still are ships out there that still have crews. There are people trying to get off of ships. The functionality of the spread of COVID on a cruise line. When we think about the travel industries, the impact on the travel industries, the inability to travel, the process of having to cancel plans, the process of having to try and chase down refunds, to look at credits, that impact on travel. And then what's really interesting here is the financial services industries, right? So we knew that there was going to be a large impact to the economy. And we can see, and what's been unfolding is, okay, how, if I am not currently employed, how am I going to pay for things like credit cards, mortgages, investment services, and insurance? And so we can see that these industries are starting to come together as villains, potential villains. So there is opportunity for change. So again, like the business case study that we looked at, when we look at total, the System 1 and System 2 responses together, we can isolate and look at online travel services. And travel, they're more of a villain than they are a hero. However, when we parse out and we look at the implicit System 1 responses, we actually can see that they're just as equally a hero as a villain, and there is opportunity to make positive change within these industries. So really stressing here is looking at the implicit data provides us with a different perspective and potentially a different business decision that we can make in looking at the opportunity for change within these industries. So going back to our visual semiotics and brand emotion data, we can see that to stand out as a hero, we really want to focus on how you can offer a sense of well-being and, more importantly, momentum. So when we look at the emotional signature and we're looking at the base, we want to provide that sense of well-being, but that next most important emotion is really that increased energy and that change. We're looking to see people pivot. We're looking to see brands provide that there is change coming, that there is positivity, and that we are moving in a direction outside of quarantine. We still want to feel cooperative, but we want to feel united and allied and participating together. And lastly, that sympathetic response. So we need to think about this as building. If we're going to look at the top three emotions, I want to be that provide that sense of well-being. I want to message that there is change, and I want to be cooperative. So here's some examples. Heroes, Amazon, and Walmart showing an interaction with communities, highlighting the friendly and cooperative emotions. And both of these brands thank employees who are actively helping and highlighting sympathetic, stimulating, and content. So they're really going exactly through the emotional signature as a way that we just played it out. And these brands successfully create feel-good loops, making the employees the hero. So motivated and hardworking employees get communities what we need. And we saw from the implicit association data that hero brands were those that provided and got us what we need while in quarantine. The communities thank the employees, and the brands or the employers then thank the employees, which make the employees, not the brand, the hero. So this loop of going back to the person who's on the front line, who's getting us what we need, those are the heroes, And how are we communicating that emotional signature? We're thanking the hero, the hardworking employee, and we're building this feel-good loop, focusing on not the brand, but the employees. So why does this matter, and how do we apply this? Memories are driven by emotions. We do not recall experiences in a straightforward way. Instead, we remember our feelings more than the actual events as a whole. We remember how people and brands make us feel, not necessarily what they say. Galvanizing events create memories. There are three main pathways to create a memory: emotion, place or location, story or narrative. And the COVID-19 pandemic is a culmination of all three of these pathways. We're more susceptible to long-term memory formation at this moment. And brands that play a part of the story during this event have the opportunity to create long-term emotional connections with consumers. So if we think about 9/11, 9/11 was one event, one day, huge emotional impact. And most people can think about where they were, what happened that day, and they can place themselves within the story or the narrative. All three channels are operated: emotion, place and location, and the story or the narrative. And we think about the behavioral changes that occurred on a singular event within the world, within the United States: travel, TSA, restrictions, mass transit. Think of all the behavioral changes and the brands that emerged out of this event. And this was a singular event in time that operated within all three of these pathways. The COVID-19 pandemic is continuously, we're now more than 60 days in, and firing in all three of these memory pathways: emotion, place and location, and story and narrative. And it's continuing to unfold. So when we think about brands that are already heroes, industries that are heroes, and those that have the potential to be villains, and we look at the emotional construct and how people want to feel, that brands really have an opportunity during an event like this to create those long-term emotional connections. So relationships with brands have changed. The majority of people have substituted a brand. Out of necessity, consumers are trying brands they haven't tried before. They're reprioritizing brands that have become important. With the need to get what we want, we've changed our habits and our behaviors. We've substituted, we've given up brand loyalty, we've taken what's been available, and we've created new relationships with brands. We've created new relationships with brands on how to entertain ourselves, on how to operate in the business world. And there's a wealth of cognitive science out there that's proven that behavioral changes occur after 60 days, and we're well beyond that point. So the interactions with these brands and with these services is going to continue, and the reliance on these brands is going to continue long after the pandemic. Emotionally fueled changes and behaviors created during the pandemic are here to stay. More than half of consumers have substituted a brand. A third have discovered a new product or service, and we're going to continue and evolve to do so during this event. How do you want to be remembered? Consumers will remember the industries that were not genuine. So thinking about the Amazon and Walmart feedback loops, those brands that do not put their employees as the hero of the story have the potential to end up being a villain. The genuine communication within the emotional construct and showing that the brand truly is resonating with the consumer. The employees must be the hero of the story, not the brand. And the brand has the opportunity to connect emotionally, and utilizing that emotional construct of, at the current moment, at the ideal, in providing that sense of well-being, that energetic change, cooperation, and sympathy. Long-term emotional bonding is happening now, and it's resulting in behavioral change. And there's this opportunity right now to take advantage of that change and place your brand within the mind space of consumers. Can you provide emotionally within the construct? Are you providing a service or a product that is necessary during this period in time? Are you providing a service that is helping consumers deal with and cope with the behavioral restrictions? Or are you positioned more as a villain? Are you in an industry that is constricting or causing stress? When we look at the financial services industries and we look at the travel industries, how do we overcome those feelings of containment and stress? So helping people rebook travel, credits, dealing with the disappointment, the emotional disappointment of not being able to go on a vacation or a trip, dealing with the emotional stress of the financial impact of mortgages and credit cards, and the financial stress of not potentially having a job or being furloughed. And so utilizing your brand to position yourself as a hero by taking advantage of the emotional construct, as well as understanding where the differences are between what a hero brand is and what a villain brand is. I'm going to move on to some questions. The first question is the color coding meaningful? Yes, the color coding of each one of the emotions corresponds with the 9 segments. So if each one of those 9 segments each has 8 emotions, and the color coding of the emotions corresponds with those. Let's see if I can jump back here. So sympathetic is an emotion within energy. Controlling and cooperative are both emotions within confidence. And so each one of those emotions fits within that segment construct. Next question is, how do I separate out the implicit from the explicit? So within the timed response, the methodology is consumers see the stimuli, and then they're going to drag and drop. And in this case, we drag and drop the industries into the 2 choices of hero and villain. And we're capturing the time that it takes to sort. So we look at the average time for each individual item. We don't want to look at across all items. We want to look at just the individual item, because some items may take longer to sort than others. So we're looking within that item, what is the average response time? We then take that average response time and create a normalized distribution. And we're looking at the implicit range. The implicit range is below that average, but within a range of about less than 700 milliseconds. It takes about 140 milliseconds for your brain to recognize the stimuli, and everything from 140 up to right around 700 milliseconds is generally accepted as implicit response. Everything beyond that average point, beyond 700 milliseconds, is explicit response. And we look at each stimuli individually, and then we look at all of the stimuli collectively, so that we can look at an individual level as well as an overall level and we look at that at a respondent level as well as an aggregate level. The next question, I'm not quite sure about the pink color. I don't think we used any pink color. Sympathetic is actually red. I apologize on your screen that it's coming up as pink, but maybe you're looking at the images, the illustration, the images. So the images, like I said, with our visual semiotics product, we decompose the images. Each image is looked at in 6 different structures, and one of those structures is color. So sympathetic could be, I'm looking at the image here, the pink color code could be related to the coding of that color structure for sympathetic. Each emotion itself is broken into those 6 structures, and those 6 structures all live within each one of those images. So the images shown on the right are examples of images that visually communicate the emotion sympathetic. Next question on automotive. Do you believe that people will have more propensity to exclusively use their own cars instead of public transportation or Uber? Asking, and this is in Brazil. So thanks for your question. So looking at the automotive industry is kind of in a unique position. If you recall from the implicit data, the automotive industry was falling out at kind of at the bottom part, just into the threshold of implicit hero. Here in the U.S., there's been quite a bit with the advertising of the automotive industry around 0% financing and really about working with consumers on how to finance and refinance and manage loans and deal with the financial stress. I do think, to your point, that within social distancing rules, that there is going to be more of an affinity to utilize your own transportation when necessary. We've all taken advantage. We can all have worked from home. We know the good parts and the bad parts of working from home, but we've proven that an entire nation can work remotely. And I think that using mass transit and things like potentially Uber. We just look at the recent acquisition by Uber into more of the food delivery service. They're seeing exactly what you're pointing out is people may be less willing to ride share, and they're toggling their business to get more into what we saw as the implicit heroes, delivering what you need. That's a long-term play. The next question, questions on the long-term behavior change slide. When those behavioral changes are associated with negative emotions, such as in this case COVID, will the negative association make them go back to behaviors with a more positive association? So behavioral changes that occur, whether or not, and again, I'll go back to 9/11. We made behavioral changes that were a necessity. Something bad, we made changes. We understand the necessity. We changed the way we travel. We changed the way that we commute. We changed the way that we look at people on public transportation. Phrases and slogans such as, see something, say something, particularly, where I live in the New York area. I think that behaviors, and there is some research behind that behaviors that occur during a traumatic experience tend to be even more long-lasting and imprint and create an even longer memory process, because those behaviors come out of that necessity. They're not necessarily behaviors that we intentionally want to impose or change, but coming out of that necessity to deal with the stressful situation, those behaviors become more reliant, and we're going to be less likely to move away from that. They become a security, and they become more imprinted in our mind. So I don't think the negative association is going to allow people to toggle back. to where they were normally. I think if anything, it's going to strengthen those relationships with brands that help people through the crisis and how people coped. They're going to become much more of a security. Next question is, do we work with research firms or only companies? Shoot me a note. We work with both. Next question, why is visual semiotics tapping into system one, in my view? And it seems to be carefully considered decision by respondents. So visual semiotics, the respondents are not going through and associating emotions to the images. They're creating a collage of images. All of the images are pre-coded and they're broken down into those 6 structures. So it's truly passive system one. The respondent is creating a collage about how they feel. They have 200 images to go through and to respond. And each respondent gets a unique set of 200 to respond to. And then we're looking at those emotional codes and structures within those images, and we're extracting the emotions from them. And, the system 2 response would be the respondent associating a verbalized or written emotion to an image, but we're not doing that. We're extracting the emotions from the image. So truly passive, the respondent has no idea of what emotions they're trying to communicate to us at a conscious level. They're putting together a collage and then we're extracting how they feel. So very much a system one passive collection tool. Next question, you stated employees must be heroes, not the brand. Can you explain why you think the brand can't be the hero? I think looking at this, at the construct in the example of Amazon and Walmart, and looking at the emotional signature that I currently have on the screen right now, is that the brand itself needs to go back and highlight those people who are providing what we need. So if we take both pieces together, the implicit association data as well as the emotional construct and visual semiotics, we can see 2 pieces to the story. Getting us what we need, who gets us what we need? It's really the employees. And we've seen a lot of backlash, already when employees are not recognized, the employees who are taking the risk and they are on the front line. If the brand comes in and tries to swoop in and try to make themselves the hero, there's backlash. It's really the employees who are providing the services and providing us what we need. The brand really is the conduit. And I really, thinking about, the emotional construct and how they need to communicate, the brand needs to communicate this sense of well-being, this momentum, cooperation, friendly and social. But they need to do it in a way that pays service to who is actually delivering the product or the service, who is the employee. The next question, can you explain how we can use implicit association and regular market research? Something like CPG. So implicit association really is, we can use implicit association several different ways. We can use the stimuli can be things like attributes, and we can sort those attributes into 2 different brands. We can understand the strengths and weaknesses of 2 different brands on delivering a set of attributes. We can take stimuli can be visual. It can be visual plus text. It can be text only. And the sorting, what we want respondents to do is to really have bipolar choices, to really force the way that we think every day. We make trade-off decisions. We want that behavioral interaction, or I'm going to choose one thing over another. And this sorting exercise really taps into how we think and really highlights the majority of our decisions are truly that implicit system 1 response. So we can take it and utilize it for product features, for naming conventions, logos, imagery, all of those components can be used within a trade-off design using implicit association tests. Anytime that you think about using an association grid or looking at, do respondents associate one thing to one brand or to one product or another, that's a good opportunity to utilize implicit association tests to really break apart that. What we typically see is that combined system 1 and system 2 data. When we parse out that system 1 data, like the case studies that we walk through, there really is a different story, and you would come to a different decision. So the next question is, why do you consider pharmacies are performing closer to being a villain than a hero? Is this because the U.S. healthcare system and the cost of scripts in the UK? And so I'll answer that first one. I think pharmacies and pharma in general, there is a reliance, right? That we're hoping that the pharma industry can find the vaccine and the cure. At the same time, particularly here in the U.S., pharma already has a tinge of villainy around it because of the pricing and all right, I'm going to come up with a vaccine, but how much is it going to cost? One of the first tests that came out for testing for COVID that was approved here in the U.S. by the Food and Drug Administration was already being priced out at $120 a test. So you think about everyday people and consumers, I can choose between buying groceries for $120 or getting a test that's being profiteered by the pharma companies. So I think a lot of the mind space around pharma is we're hopeful and we're reliant and we want them to discover the vaccine, and we know that we're going to need them, but at the same time we do know and we've seen that there is the taking advantage of the capitalization of the drugs and the tests. And so, how is the government going to come in and regulate that? The second part of the question is, in the UK, a number of major airlines have announced they're making a large number of employees redundant. And Europe, Amazon is not viewed as considering its employees as heroes, but not observing proper social distancing. I think, and that's part of, that ad campaign by Amazon, I'll answer that first, is that the employee is wearing a mask. The employee is delivering what we need, and that the brand itself has prioritized, ordering your TV stand over ordering something more critical. The brand itself has gone through and managed their logistics to, we're so used to the 2-day delivery on Prime, that delivering the necessities of what people really need over the luxury items, and showing that the employee, particularly in the U.S., with this ad, is the child is inside the house. She writes the message on the sidewalk before the delivery. She's properly socially distanced. She's isolated. The employee is coming with a proper face mask. He sees the message written by the child, thanking them for delivering what we believe is the necessity, and that employee is then thanked by the company. So really creating that positive feedback loop. So in this ad in particular, Amazon really is showing that they're taking all of the steps of proper social distancing, utilizing PPE, the isolation, and receiving what you need. Next question is, can you please explain how this library of emotions respective images was created? Yes, so started 30 years ago, and it started with creating a library within the psychology field to improve communications with nonverbal autistic children. That was the basis of the image library. It started off as an analog library of images that grew over time and then was digitized. We have 9,000 images that were created over those 30 years. The image library was patented in the early 90s. In the technique of understanding the codes, the emotional codes within each one of the images and extracting out those emotions are part of that patented process. The library itself began and continued to evolve over the course of its life within the field of behavioral science and psychology, and then came into the marketing field. The next question, would you please elaborate about villains and not doing good or doing bad? So the villain emotions, what we saw really, the drivers of what was making brands villains really was about containment and stress. And so if your brand is falling within one of those categories of travel services, financial services, or politics, what consumers are looking for you to do is really operate within the emotional delivery or the emotional signature that I've currently got on screen right now to offer up that sense of well-being and momentum. So the villains themselves are part and parcel about what the repercussions are, so financial. Also, the travel, right? So the restrictiveness of travel and the industries that play within that, as well as, how do I get back what I've invested in travel? The point of this presentation is to show that there are no solid villains at this point, and there is opportunity to change. And so in that one slide where I looked at, the travel services and the online services, when we looked at the System 1 and System 2 data together, but then when we parsed it out, we could see that there was opportunity for those services to become heroes. And the pathway to become a hero is to deliver emotionally within this construct that's currently on the slide. The next question, sorting 200 pictures at a time. So you don't have to sort 200 pictures. You have a library of 200 pictures. We want to make sure you've got a good, solid library of images to work with. You could go through and you could create your collage out of the first 10 images. Maybe you go through the first 50 images to create your collage. There's no restriction. You don't have to go through all 200. We just want you to create a collage of 10 that represents how you feel. And we give you a full expansive image library to go through. They can go through and take as much time as they want to sort and create the collage. On average, it's about 3.5 minutes for a consumer to create a collage. One of the statistics that we pull from the data is how many images people go through to create the collage. And it's quite an amazing number of images that people will actually go through in the thought process of the images that they put together. And the wear out, so I already addressed, time and wear out. We've tested most, from a survey construct standpoint, we recommend that respondents go through no more than 2 exercises, so 3.5 minutes per exercise, 2 exercises, depending upon, what the intent is of your survey. We're going to build this in. This is an important piece of understanding how consumers feel, behave, and think. And we want to make sure that you have enough time to be able to do that. So, we're going to recommend cutting some of the surplus, scalar questions or attitudinal questions to be able to work in a System 1 tool. The next question, when you're using to understand competing brands and attributes, how many brands can you accommodate in an exercise? I'm going to assume this is for an IAT exercise. So for implicit association, 2 ways to approach understanding associations implicitly to brands. We can either put the respondent in the mindset of the brand and then have them associate, agree, disagree, where we understand just that one brand in isolation and whether or not there's an implicit association, agreement, or disagreement that attribute is being delivered by that brand. Another way to do it is to pit the two brands against each other. For example, if we put American Express and Citibank, and we put in attributes, let's say trust, and then we would associate those attributes within those two brands. Now we're really forcing a trade-off, and we want to understand the strength of those associations with the implicit data, but not only that, but where is the trade-off. When we do brands like that, what we'll do is if you have, let's say you have 6 brands, we'll have one brand be constant, and so those pairs will be, so Amex, Citibank, Amex, Chase, Amex, Wells Fargo. Then all of that data becomes bridged, and we can look at the complete data set of Amex across all of those competitors, and we can aggregate together all of the Amex data in this example. So you can use the implicit association test. It's meant to be quick. An IAT with 20 to 25 items is less than 1 minute of sorting. And so respondents can tolerate multiple implicit association tests. It's very gamified, it's very engaging, and we get great data for it. The next question: for brands that are villains, can you speak to how this tool can help drive strategy so they're remembered positively post-COVID? So for brands or categories that are already leaning towards villainy, the strategy would really be to look at this emotional construct that I currently have on screen. How can you deliver within this emotional construct, delivering primarily that sense of well-being and that momentum of change, increased energy and creating change, cooperative, supportive, united, and sympathetic. So thinking about your creative and your creative messaging, how can I operate within this emotional construct? Can I tell the story using my employee and using my employee as the hero? Am I delivering a product or service that was already seen as necessary as part of those hero services? If not, can I elevate my brand or product to be seen as necessary for potentially the next phase that we're going into? And I'm really looking at these tools both from a strategic and a tactical. So in the example that I utilized around the sleep aid, that was a tactical application of visual semiotics, where we were looking at the communications to really understand whether or not that piece of communications was delivering upon the emotional construct. Where were the barriers that people were taking away? So you can use visual semiotics to understand those comms from a tactical standpoint, but also from where does your brand sit, and from a strategy standpoint, what is your brand already emotionally evoking in the hearts and minds of consumers, and then understanding what your emotional signature is as a brand, and then do you have permission to operate in space to the right or to the left of how people already perceive your brand. And then using implicit association testing to understand those different messaging components. What's the optimal combination? What implicitly resonates with consumers? And so building a comm strategy both on visuals and content, and keeping in mind the emotional construct on how consumers want to be messaged to at this moment. They want to see that pivot. They want to see that sense of well-being and that momentum. So thank you all. I think we're at the end of our time, and that's the last question in my inbox. I really appreciate it, and I hope to see you all again on another future webinar. And I turn it back over to Christine.
Thank you so much, Todd, for this webinar today, and thank you everyone again for being with us. We hope that you enjoyed it, and we wish you well for the rest of your day wherever you are.